I'm very glad to be seated alongside one of the greatest documentary filmmakers the country has ever produced. And the IDSFFK is really proud to honor her with the Lifetime Achievement Award. Very jovial person. While sitting down below, she was looking at the image. She said, "Your photo is okay, and mine, it seems as if I'm asking for a cup of tea or coffee." That is what the image that comes into the mind of a filmmaker when we see an image or a visual. And she was congratulating the entire team of the academy and also the delegates for making this festival a grand success on the very first day. Madam, you have been to this festival as a delegate, as a filmmaker, and now honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award. Looking back in your career spanned into long 4 decades, what is your feel now?
Okay, I just want to say one thing. Yeah, I want to thank the Academy for the award. I think that's it. It's not just the award, but it's also an acknowledgement of supporting documentary. I would say, which is great. But I only object to that word lifetime, because implicit in that word is that, okay, now you're on the shelf, life is over. There's a kind of peculiar RIP tone to it. So I do want to say that I want to continue working, hopefully. So there is, as they say, still life left to do that. Yeah. I just feel this is a very I think when we started working, I must say that I came into filmmaking by accident. I never went to film school. And it was really came into filmmaking out of a political impulse. It was not an aesthetic impulse, or because when the emergency ended and many of us were part of a very dynamic and exciting women's movement at the time. And that is where we decided to actually make films on certain movements that working class women were undertaking. And was there a possibility to make the film and then, in a sort of circular loop, return it to similar communities, just to start a conversation, start a kind of political conversation on whether unions are possible. And we were looking at women in the informal sector, and their stories were largely invisible. Formal trade unions were not really interested in organizing, say, domestic workers or tobacco workers or BD workers who were women. So that was the initial intention, and we started a feminist film collective called Yugantar in 1980, and proceeded to make. We made 4 films totally. I think 2 or 3 of them are here in this program. And the films, I want to say one thing about that, because that work, do I go on like this, or you're going to ask me questions? I continue? Okay. So just checking. Yeah, so I think the reason why I talk about that is that it was there really that my filmmaking practice was forged, because in those 3 years that it was, our collective working with women's collectives. So how do you create a collaborative film practice? How do you create a film practice where the so-called, in quotes, the subjects of your films are co-authors, And I think this was very important in the sense of as much as we could, because you have to remember those are the days of 16 mm. you couldn't really see what you had filmed. You had to wait for the rushes to come back from the lab. So, in a sense, it was initially when we approached women, and for example, the Domestic Workers Union in Pune or the Tobacco Workers Union in Nipani, the initial conversations and negotiations were about, what do you find significant or important, and how do you want those stories to be told? And can we then come to some sort of understanding as political allies, not as behalfists or not mediating, but can we come to some understanding of that? And we learned from each film. I mean, it was, I have to say that in the collective, the only person who had film experience was Navroz Contractor, who was from the Film Institute and by then a very well-known cinematographer. The three of us, I had assisted fiction film directors, but very briefly, and assisted is a very grand word because in those days you were basically a gopher, I mean, whether it was costumes or props or production or everything, one did everything on these kinds of very small budget art films, they were called in those days. So zero experience. So the Abha Bhaiya, who was a full-time activist, went on again to, actually she was the founding member of two very important feminist organizations, Saheli and Jagori. So this was a group of four of us, and so in a sense, not having gone to film school actually was very liberating because I didn't know any better. So it was, you felt very free. There was no, do you want to do dramatic reconstruction? Why not? Do you want to do a hybrid form? Why not? There was no, we could experiment with all kinds of things. I think that experience, those 3 years, and then the distribution of it, because we learned even from distribution, because we were carrying around these films, these 16mm rolls, and became very unpopular because in buses, nobody, they don't want any of that luggage. You have to climb to the top and put it up there. You had to find spaces to show the films, which meant you had to steal a power line from somewhere. We were showing these films in any space where women could meet, actually. So whether it was a community hall, sometimes pavements, a school building. And the discussions post the films is where we learned really what would feed into the next film. Hopefully we got a little better. That was really my, if you like, very immersive film and political education combined, right? And this is the practice that continued in everything that followed. After 3 years, the collective, the collective broke up because people wanted to do different things, but Navroz and I continued with filmmaking. Yeah.
How difficult was making a film, then finding spaces for screening the film, and drawing parallels from the Film Society moment? You might have gone to places, bringing people together, making a collective and screening, getting the sponsors from them. Any specific experience of such screenings for the people, bringing people together? It's a continuity, not just making the film and leaving it there, but bringing it to the people.
I think that was the most exciting part, actually, because I'll share one thing. See, in this, trying to attempt a collaborative practice, right? So every time we would screen the rough cut, we would take the rough cut back, and we would have a screening of the rough cut and complete discussions as to and suggestions and critique of what they felt about the film, and we would try and come to some consensus of what the final film could be like, and so you have to imagine in those days, so 16mm, now you film on 16mm and you do the audio mix on 35, right? Because there were no 16 possibility to do audio. So we had to actually take the 35 picture blow up and 35 sound for the rough cut in different cans. You can't imagine how lucky you are now with these digital files and all that. So lugging this back, right? And the tobacco workers film in Nipani, we had to find a theater where we could screen this because it was not possible with our 16 projector. So we found a doctor, he had a small clinic and he had a theater, and he used to show one film every evening or night. It would end at about 10:30. So he gave us the theater after that. So there were about 300 women came from the union to watch it, and we couldn't show it only once. We had to show it many times. So we were there till sort of 3 in the morning. He was very kind, I must say, the doctor. He didn't lock up and go. He allowed us to be there. So it was in that kind of space, where you try and understand them. And they were very insistent on language, for example, right? That the correct, that the narration which we had recorded in their voices, the kind of language that was used, the intonation, the kind of slang, the pronunciation, from which area. Oh, you are from Belgaum, she's from Nipani, she's from, so that is one experience which I remember very much. And the other experience, the same place, when we finished the film and took the final film back, then we actually showed it on the highway, because we actually stopped trucks for 1 hour on the highway, and the screen was across and people were sitting all around, watching. So those were the kind of very exciting times, really, of screening, and more importantly, listening to what women had to say post, after watching, and what they felt.
Since those days, if you compare with those days and now, there is a renewed focus on your films, because the Arsenal Film Archive, they have digitized many of your films, and it has been screened at Berlin again. And so there is a renewed focus on your films, I suppose. How did that happen, actually? You are so lucky to have such an opportunity.
Yeah,
Many
it was
people
very,
are,
very lucky. Very, very lucky, actually, because there was her name is Nicole Wolf, and she's a professor at Goldsmith in the UK. Teaches visual cultures, and she had come to India to do a research paper on Indian documentary filmmakers. So she was traveling around India, and that's how we met, because she was going, everybody would give her one name and then she would move to the next place. And while talking to her, I mentioned these films and I said, you can't see them because the prints are in terrible shape. I can't show you anything. I can talk the film. I can't show it. I can tell you what they were about. And she got very excited hearing about it, because it was an experiment, it was a kind of experiment. And so that happened. We stayed in touch. And she was doing some research in Arsenal, in the video archive in Berlin. And she came across a print of Kya Hua Sheher Ko, another one of our films. And I remember that phone call so distinctly. Like, I was screaming literally, because we had lost that print also. There was nothing to, that print also had disintegrated. And she said, do you know that there is a print of your film in the archive? And because in those days, when they screened your film in Berlin, they bought a print, actually. And they, burnt German subtitles on it. So it was there. And then the conversation started, like, how can we restore these? And they actually got some funding. Not just our films, they restored films. I think Ruchir Joshi, I think Hashiram Kotwal from Yukt, they also restored. So it took 10 years of, raising funds, doing one film at a time. But now finally, those 4 are done, 5 films are done. And yeah, I'm very grateful to them for that. But what has surprised me the most is that there is a renewed interest in sort of festival screenings of the Yugantar films. And when we made them, we didn't even think of them as festival films, or they were not. We never thought of. It was very much in this other circuit. And I'm bemused by that. Is it because they're looking at archive, history? What do they find interesting in that? Yeah, but there is a lot of interest. I mean, they're being screened. Many festivals have screened them in a special category. Yeah.
And इस शहर को क्या हुआ? I've seen many people talking about the film, and then maybe in festival circuit also on many discussions it happened. And but I just want to ask you, what happened to my city? शहर को क्या हुआ? There is a tone of despair or discomfort uh, in the title itself. So what happened to my city? Okay, there is anyways hope over despair. That is what takes us move forward. And this question is reverberating in contemporary India, taking more to the cities. Recent Manipur issue is in front of our eyes. So while making the film, especially to that title, there is a sort of despair or discomfort or dissatisfaction that is creeping into our mind. Whether that influence a filmmaker apart from the subject itself.
See, Hyderabad is my city. I mean, I grew up there. It's my home city, actually. And the city I grew up in, and what started to happen from the late 70s, early 80s, was so different, because by 1980, you saw, for example, Ganesh procession in Hyderabad was always done in homes. People would put up the Ganesh Murti at home. The immersion was also a private affair. It was never public processions. But by 1980, you saw massive public processions with huge Ganeshas that were put up in pandals that were in community pandals, and it was the main person behind it was this BJP MLA. And what used to happen is that each time after the procession, or even during the procession, there would be riots and a lot of killings. People would be stabbed. So the initial idea of the film was, what is attracting these young men in their thousands, right, to be part of these activities? Why are they so drawn to this? I mean, that was a very modest inquiry, But once we started shooting the procession, and before your eyes, literally a riot breaks out, and there's, you know, I mean, the police are shooting into the crowd. This goes on, and then we just decided to stay with it. We were filming for about 18 days or something like that, and then had to decide, okay, drop the early idea and do something that's a kind of autopsy of a riot, and because I think till that time, as far as I remember, documentary films, particularly on communal riots, didn't really go into whether, who were the players, no? What was the agenda? How did it happen? The films were made, but it was always somehow there was a reticence to name and to talk about really who was behind any of it. Okay, so I think in that sense, Kya Hua is a bit of a first, because we actually did that. We talked about the political situation, who benefited, and at that time it was the Congress, because there was a whole chief minister situation going on, and yeah, so this was if you say the title is in despairing, yes, because it is something you're seeing changing before your very eyes, and it's something, it's very painful now to see a city you loved, and the kind of relationships between communities being destroyed in this way, It is very painful. So, yeah, the film definitely has that. There is another thing, that with that film, when I look at it now, and on the dais, actually, you see they're not alive, but many VHP members are there. Huh? And at the time, where even when you're filming, I'm sure it's happened to a lot of you, many of you documentary filmmakers, you may be in a situation you don't understand the historical impact of position of where you are and what you're shooting. At the time, you don't get the full picture. You're filming something, and it's like, okay, like 20 years later, 30 years later, you look back and say, why was I not aware that we just shot it as a Ganesh procession? It was not at that time, though this Hindutva language has started, the mobilization had started, the appeal to that kind of politics had started, but you don't recognize it. You recognize it when about 5 years later, 10 years later, it gets more and more. You say, oh, okay, that's a very strange feeling. Um, yeah.
It was just a beginning. The political agenda was actually set.
Yeah, being
And you want
crafted.
to tell that through the documentary itself that this is not a sporadic or a spontaneous incident. There is already a political agenda set for a wider canvas. That's all there in the documentary. And it was a first of its kind, I suppose. Like while making the documentary, apart from its aesthetics or form or style, there is a level playing field which when you see women sitting together, and maybe this is all set in a very remote village, and people are I've seen women talking genuinely. Yeah, I'm talking about that. Talking very freely and genuinely to the camera. So that level playing field, how there are many aspiring filmmakers here, how a level playing field is set before the subject of the film, how they are making them open to speak to you.
I don't know. I think everybody has their own process and ways of doing things. It's the film you're speaking about is something like a war, and that film is really about the uh, you know actually the uh, terrible excesses of the family planning program. And so there are two tracks in the film. One track is the actual program and how brutal it is, with sterilizations, how corrupt the program is, all of that. And the other track is really the targets of the program, who are women from. So we had a group. There were rural women and women from Delhi. A group we assembled, and there the intention was: can we just listen to what women want, right? What do they want in terms of reproductive health, or what do they want in terms of everything associated with that. So we took a place actually in Biawar in Rajasthan, and it was a small house in a village, and we lived together for about 10 days, and we would only film for, I think, 3 or 4 hours a day, or even less than that. But the rest of the time it was just being together. No? It's not so it, and I think for women, I've said this quite a few times, that women never have leisure. No, where do you have leisure to just sit, not cook, not clean, not wash, not look after children, not look after old parents? It's so hard to just find that time to just to relax, right? So I think many things contributed to that ease of speech. One was that we also became friends. It's not just that they just assembled and the shoot is done and over. It's not like that. So I think many things contributed to it. And every evening, this was also great, because I mean, it's a very small village, and we were the hottest thing in town. I mean, people were so curious, like, who are these people? What are they up to? So every night after 8:30, women from the village would come. They'd finish everything, and they would come to this house, and they would be singing, they would be dancing, there would be jokes, and we'd be begging them to leave because we had to start shooting the next day. They won't. So only when the mother-in-laws and the older women left, so the daughter-in-laws are waiting for them to go. So it was a two-step thing, and then they could be free, and so it was that kind of a spirit. It was a very joyous time. I think the thing is also, many of my films, I mean, like at least with women, I have to fall in love with them. It has to be pleasurable. We have to enjoy being together. I think that's what happened there. Yeah.
The invoking justice
Yeah.
experience, that also is very different to finding out a women women Jamaat group, self determination of the women. That's also feel like very unique subject you have taken, and maybe in the aftermath, its impact factor is high, that there are such groups forming in different parts of the country, like.
So that film is actually, in a sense, a friend told me about them, and I just went on a recce, to see, and I frankly was very skeptical. I said, how can Muslim women create their own Jamaat, actually adjudicate? Is it even possible? But the minute I saw them and saw their functioning, it was very clear that this was going to be a film. See, the thing is, you go with your biases. There are so many biases about, which persist and which are so, which we should shed. So this thing of, because most of them actually are, they have very small businesses, or they have, maybe they do a little bit of fishery business. They do, small, like, pottukade kind of business. So they're not wealthy, right? But the thing of their belief in creating an Islamic institution, see, it's not an NGO, it's an Islamic institution. They say, like, there is a male Jamaat, we have a women's Jamaat. So that is also fantastic to see them function, and they are now, in fact, the male Jamaat has to take them very seriously. They can't. In the beginning, it was very hard. They attacked them. They were very dismissive. But now they are on par, I would say. Yeah.
And this Rohit Vimala documentary, and how difficult, what is the transformation since you have made, what happened to the city, and decades after, if you are making a documentary, like, what is the transformation which you have felt during the years in making such a film, bold attempt actually?
See, there are certain themes that have stayed with me throughout, and definitely caste is one of them. See, and I have done a lot of work in producing films for government schools in Karnataka, and a lot of that work is, for example, we did a very intensive, almost a 9-film series, which was to get primary school teachers really to interrogate why there is dropout. Why do children from ST, SC, minority communities, even at primary school level, by 4th standard, 5th standard, what is that about? And that journey for me started actually in almost in 96, from 96. So this work, which is either work with teachers or work with children. Actually, there's one film which I have included, you have included in this package, which is from that series of teaching history. So the question of caste and how it plays out in primary education has been something I've been following for a long time. But in higher education, this was the first time with Rohit Vemula's death. Um, and I think that film for me started with his letter. I think his letter was just so powerful, you know. So the idea there was, you know, can we just go to the campus, you know, let us see what is happening, and there also there was no. After a point, for example, my partner Navroz was filmed all my films actually. He kept saying, you know, this is crazy. What are you going to make of this? And there doesn't seem to be a direction. And you know, have you got an edit in your mind, or what are we up to here? Because we were shooting off and on for 18 months, you know, just following things as they were happening. And I don't know, I was just caught up in the emotion of it, you know, because as you start and then you get closer to students, to the family, it becomes almost part of, you're also part of what they're doing, you know, it's not just filming. So that's how that film began. And yeah, that's, I mean, you see that, but yeah.
I don't know how many times the name of Navro's contractor has come up, and I have read in today's newspaper you would have liked to share this lifetime or futuristic award with Navro's contractor. It's your partner in art and life. We have also very fond remembrance about him in instituting an award for this festival. He has supported us like that. So you can have a few words about him also for the audience.
No, you know, there is a very false hierarchy in documentary that you know, director, cinematographer, sound editor, and I want to say that, you know, it is, documentary is a very collective effort. You know, you can't. I mean, everybody's contribution is how the film gets made, right? And I think that thing of saying, you know, the director gets the award or the whatever, the name, fame, glory, whatever it is kind of false, you know. So I feel in this instance, I mean, I think that Navroz's camera, his contribution is immense. I mean, you know, it's so that's something that, which is why I said that, you know, he totally. Um, there is no way the films would be what they are without his his way of looking, his way of framing, his you know, any of that. Yeah. And also in this context, I would I'd also like to say that even editors, I mean, you know, even editors, for example, I've done a lot of work with Jabin Merchant, and I want to also name her that, you know, films are really written on, the documentary films are really written on the edit table, you know. So that collaboration also is huge, you know. It's a very almost co-authoring kind of collaboration, right? Yeah.
I think now we can move on to the audience if you have some questions to ask.
Madam, what one gathers is that the prevailing silos of fiction and non-fiction is vanishing because they are blurring lines. We can now don't have a compartmentalization like that of the previous years. Now the feature film, the non-fiction film, etc., are having blurring lines. A 1980 FTI library book is titled non-fiction film for documentaries. You know, can be titled like that now. And another question regarding what happened to my city. Hyderabad being the high-tech city of India, there could have entirely digital transformation of the urban scape. Could be, there could be. So, in what amount, what levels the digitized society influences individual lives, what transformation they have made in their lives. As you rightly pointed out, what happened to my city from the previous generations to the native, digital native society. We are digital immigrants. So, what happened in between? These are the two questions.
No, I think your first point, which is about the blurring of the lines, um, I think that's a very good step, actually. I think this to be, um, see, it all depends on the personal expression of the filmmaker. And I think more and more experimentation is good. I think lines should be blurred. I don't think we should be rigid about one form or another form. So in that, I am with you. I think, and you can see it happening more and more. Actually, and it's exciting. It's a good place. It's a good direction, I feel. I'm not sure about whether I understood you correctly about this, how digitized lives have
The,
changed.
okay, the cyberscape
Huh?
in the Hyderabad society. What is the influence on individuals?
See, as far as I know, the whole IT part of it is in a silo by itself. That is like Bangalore, the Silicon Valley kind of space where they don't really, there is no interaction as such between ordinary citizens of Hyderabad and that high tech world or that place. But if you're talking about how people today are very comfortable with cell phones, watching things, internet, definitely, I think everybody is in some sort of occupying some sort of digital space. But I would say the high tech part is something different. Actually.
To what extent digital urbanization influences celluloid film industry?
I'm sorry, I really can't answer that. I really have no idea. Yeah.
Anything?
Hi, ma'am. Thank you for your tremendous work. As filmmakers of today, there's something that we all find ourselves complaining a lot about, and that is distribution. We say that our audience, our films are not being taken to platforms. We are finding it very hard to find audiences, and what I'm hearing in the conversation with you is that it's almost like there was a time when the landscape of distribution, i.e. your films reaching audiences, was so vibrant. You would do the work and then you would find the audiences that you were talking about on the highways and in these various spaces. And even Anand Patwardhan has very often taken his work directly to audiences. What is it that we can learn from those moments for this time of today, where we are almost collectively worrying about distribution?
There's a sort of missing link in this, right? And what I'd like to say is that, see, when we were making films, for example, there was a very existent feminist movement in the country. Okay, so in a way, we were very plugged into those groups, and not just in cities, in different places. So this connect with these groups meant that literally they would invite us to come, because we were also part of that movement. We were documenting some part of it, part of those groups. So that connect, today it doesn't exist, I feel, right? In the sense of which is the community that you're addressing or speaking to. You don't have to have a community to address or speak to, but I'm saying that's what made it easier for us, because this was there. And I'm talking, but not just for distribution. I feel Like I can give you examples. For example, with Rakesh Sharma's film, right? So it's not just a community that supports you to screen your films, but it's a community that supports you even when, say, a particular film is in trouble. Okay, so this kind of context was very different. You know, it happened with his film, it happened with Anand's films. It's and recently, I think Debelina, one of her films was, I think, Jadavpur University. They pulled it out of a festival. And so, one of the first things that many of us suggested is, show the film now. Just go out and that worked as a strategy. So, I feel, in some sense, you also have to cultivate, you have to cultivate um, connections with community, not just in an instrumentalist way, because you want them to show your films, but you have to have a connect. This is, um, I mean, this is what I think. If I look back and say, what was that? What was our situation? It was like that. And I can tell you that once those connections are made, right? In a sense, it's for a lifetime. These things don't these relationships don't dissolve so easily, like I'll tell you, for example, the other thing with the Rohit Vemula film, which was, I think, for me, super exciting, because I think in each decade, each time, you reach out to newer communities, you make different connections, you use different methods. So we felt that we didn't want to do the typical thing, which is a premiere and all that stuff. So we said that, okay, on his death anniversary, that is 2018, so we gave out a call to, uh, I think, almost like 800 colleges and universities, and we said, we will give you the file, okay? Screen it on January 17th. Do you know, the response was fantastic. On that day, we had more than 700 screenings one day. Wow. Okay, and we told students, your responsibility, because I was nervous. I said, if you are confident about the security of when you screen it, because DU and all are, these ABVP everywhere, it's going to be a problem. But only 3 screenings were stopped. Students managed to hold their ground and screen it. So I'm just saying, I think each instance, one has to little bit be proactive in terms of how you want to reach out, what do you want to, um, you know, how do you want to connect with this film, and to whom. Um, yeah.
Thank you.
Madam, you mentioned about Nicole Wolf, a documentary historian. What about her further contributions on Indian documentary scene?
Well, her contribution is extraordinary, because I think she's written many papers about it. She's in close touch with many filmmakers here. She follows the scene quite carefully. So, yeah, her contribution as a theorist and a writer, researcher is huge, actually. Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. Good afternoon. So, I wanted to ask you something related to finances for films, and especially when it comes to funding. It's a major issue, and when you're not making commercial content, getting funding is, when you're not backed by a very big surname in the industry, it becomes very difficult, and which ultimately leads like beginners like us who making films to somewhere try to compromise in the content that they are making to suit the needs of the ones who could provide funds, and at the same time our need to make films. So I would like to know your thoughts about that. And my second question for you is, the independent cinema, as all over the world, it's not very financially rewarding. It's more of an artistic reward. It's more of that you're doing it out of love. When you look at commercial cinema, it's more financially rewarding, but then again there are many entry barriers in that field. So yeah, I'd like to ask that how is the field in general financially sustainable for people who really want to continue making films, but at the same time have different responsibilities that they need to cater to?
I'm very sorry to tell you, but you need two jobs, especially with documentaries. I don't think with fiction, I really don't know. I really don't know the industry or any of that. But really, documentaries, if you want to continue making documentaries, it is very difficult. There is no, I mean, what do we have? You know, there's PSBT, which is, I think, wound up. I'm not sure. Films division now, they may be funding, but that again is a kind of process you have to go through. So this really, it is very difficult. This is a form that nobody is interested in supporting, you know. So I would say you really you need two jobs. You need a different and if I look at my own life, in fact, one of the reasons why I did all this work with the education department or whatever in Karnataka, because it was an interest of mine and etc. But yeah, it was definitely like because I had to, you know. So I mean, there are opportunities now like Doc Edge in Calcutta. These kinds of things are there. These pitching sessions, all of this stuff. But it's very hard, na? It's very tough. All that negotiating, all that. So you have to go into it with your eyes wide open. I'm not sugarcoating anything. It's not going to be easy. In fact, you have to be quite nuts to continue making documentaries. Really, it is difficult. No, I mean we have no. Where is the support for anything, right? It's I mean even distribution, for example. I don't know that now OTT platforms, this and that, but I don't. It's not going to be. There are no places really because we don't broadcast everywhere else in the world. There is broadcast, telecast, there is funding, right? Because the films get seen even. India doesn't have that situation. So my famous line used to be that we are the best narrowcasters, because if you look at it, okay, this gloom and doom scenario, but I'll tell you something else. Look at right now the kind of very interesting, maybe small, but very interesting things. You have this People's Film Festival in Calcutta. I mean, it's the 10th year. It's amazing, and they've kept going with funding. They're not taking funds from state or anything. You have Amudam in Madurai. He's finished 25 years of showing documentaries, working on documentaries. You have Pedestrian Pictures in Bangalore. They're also very active. You have Sanjay Joshi in Udaipur, then Cinema of Resistance, whatever. So these are also models which are very unique and we should be very proud of in India, that despite all the odds, they continue, they screen. Um, yeah, so I feel that is also happening. And today another thing that I found more and more, no, that so many universities, for example, have their own little festivals. Or, for example, in teaching, a lot of people want, they use films in the classroom. So, yeah, we are in a different media system. Okay. There are some people who also put up their stuff online and they use Patreon, whatever there is. So, yeah, I think just to map out the field a little bit. But if you think you can sustain only by making docs, no, that is not going to happen. Yeah.
Hi, ma'am.
Thank you for your response, ma'am.
Excuse me. Hi, ma'am. As a student of Delhi University, I was watching your documentary on Rohit Mirmila with tears because even now we face the right-wing attack for just being there, for just being studying in Delhi University. We face the attacks, the anti-national slogans of BJP and right-wing. So my question is that the largest democrat in this largest democratic country, we are still having difficulties to have independent filmmaking. And even now, Rohit Vemula is being picturized as an anti-national over Delhi universities and in the campuses of JNU, Jamia. So, what is your opinion on that?
No, what was the question actually? No, I agree with everything you're saying, but I didn't hear the
Do
question.
you think that independent filmmaking is so difficult in India right now?
You mean making political work?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think political work is not easy now. Yeah, I mean, look at the, again, as I was saying, look at the media ecosystem today. You have YouTubers, you have influencers who are of all, uh, you know, the producing. Um, I mean, just today somebody sent me something. There's this woman, Archana Tiwari, or something, who's done a whole thing on what is happening in Haryana today. So you are in a system where this kind of I would say, I won't. It's not a film, but this kind of audiovisual material is circulating freely, right? Um, you have online trolling violence that also becomes offline trolling violence. Oh, So I think if political work, if you're going to go up against what is basically a majoritarian state, you have to be very clear what you're doing, because there will be consequences and you have to be clear whether you want to deal with those consequences. It's a fact, you know. So, for example, like when I think of like Kya Hua Sheher Ko at that time, it was not a majoritarian state. The courts were not captured. We could, even if it took us 1 year to get a census certificate by going on appeal, those institutions existed. Today, they've changed the censor board. So, once a film is banned, you only have to go to court. So, you see, I'm talking about the other institutions that could support work like this, that you could depend on, maybe are not things you can depend on anymore. So, yeah, I would say that is the situation if you want to do that kind of work. Yeah.
Assuming that there are no more questions, I think we have to wind up this conversation and go for the screening. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful time you have spent with us. And of course, uh, you will remain the model of this festival for the people who have come to this festival, the youngsters, with their movies. Thank you.